So, a few months ago, I published my book, Airport Urbanism, which, as we heard from Andres a few minutes ago, is an unprecedented study based on 10 years of research that I did at more than 50 airports in Asia, Europe, the Middle East, and North America. And in particular, I focus on the rise of Asia because, as we know, that's where most of the growth in traffic has been coming from over the past decades, but also it's where a lot of the innovation is happening. So the implications of this book are not just for airports in Asia, but actually for airports everywhere. In the book, I draw on quantitative data, on qualitative site analyses, and on hundreds of interviews I did with passengers, with airport managers, architects like yourselves, transport planners, real estate developers, concessions operators, and airline executives. And I use that data to investigate a bunch of topics that I think are critical for the planning and design of both airport terminals and airport areas. So I'd like to share some of my insights with you today about how the development and also redevelopment of airports can be used as a powerful urban design strategy, and also it has the potential to produce economically, environmentally, and sustainably and socially sustainable airport areas at a much larger scale. A key insight that I found is that the airport city and the Aerotropolis models, which, as I'm sure you know, are the dominant urban design strategies that we use today, I found that these models actually aren't working very well. And after touring lots of empty office buildings and underperforming logistics hubs, I started to think about how we could build on the strengths of these older models, move beyond their shortcomings, and update them for the demands of the 21st century airport and the 21st century economy. So what I'm trying to do today is change the conversation. And to do that, I'll talk about some of the problems with the current urban design paradigm and then introduce a new people-focused development model called Airport Urbanism, or AU for short. But first, bear with me for like 60 seconds of history. So since the early days of civil aviation, airport designers have tried to productively integrate the airport into the surrounding city, and also to use the airport as a springboard for developing the communities located around the airfield. In the 20s and 30s, European architects suggested combining the airport with existing typologies like amusement parks, exhibition halls, and railway stations. Now, over in the United States, meanwhile, designers thought that airports should be merged with other new typologies that were considered exciting and futuristic. That included stuff like supermarkets, skyscrapers, and, yes, parking lots. So in 1939, the term Aerotropolis was first used in a kind of fanciful proposal for an airfield built on top of an inner-city office tower, which we see on the lower right. On both sides of the Atlantic, urban planners argued that the airport could be used to develop satellite towns to service the emerging logistics industry. Some, like Le Corbusier, even thought that the entire new cities should be built around the airport. Like railway stations in the 19th century, airports would become the focal point of urban growth. And in these projects from the 30s, which you see here, you start to see the emergence of airport-specific urban design strategies. This notion that airports could serve as centers for urban development remained popular throughout the post-war era, but actually the idea never came to fruition. Now, about 25 years ago, the economist Jack Cassarda recycled a lot of these older ideas, and he turned them into a development model that he called the Aerotropolis. He argued that the airport of the future would assume the role that downtowns had played in the 20th century. And he claimed that in a globalizing economy, accessibility to air transport would be essential for doing business, and that land located near the airport would then naturally become a desirable place to build corporate headquarters and convention centers, and also to store things like time-sensitive cargo like food and flowers. So that was a really interesting idea, but the problem is it's just not true. So simply put, the airport doesn't have the pull of historic city centers, which have steadily regained their attractiveness over the last 20 years. And if anything, companies and their employees want to be downtown now more than ever in attractive, walkable, mixed-use neighborhoods. At the same time, the urban periphery, which is, as we know, where most airports are located, has increasingly become home of the poor and the poorly educated. It also turns out that it's not super efficient to store cargo near the airport, and I won't go into that now, but maybe we can get into that into the Q&A. So there are, of course, some examples where the Aerotropolis and airport city models have been a huge success, like Schiphol in the Netherlands and Las Colinas near DFW. But again, my research shows that these examples do well because their airports are located in the middle of a dense metropolitan region, equidistant from multiple urban centers. And on the other hand, we have dozens of failed Aerotropolis projects on nearly every continent. So with that in mind, today I'd like to propose a fundamentally different approach to the urban design around airports. Where the Aerotropolis starts with a predetermined set of typologies, like office parks and logistics hubs, Airport Urbanism, or AU for short, starts with people, or what we in the architecture community like to call the user. And where the Aerotropolis focuses on the global economy and on designing master-planned urban districts from scratch, Airport Urbanism focuses on an airport's unique user profile in order to identify site-specific planning and design guidelines. So these creative development strategies aim to match the needs of an airport's particular passenger mix with the existing strengths of local communities and the skill sets of local residents. Because at the end of the day, the economic dynamics at the airport revolve around three sets of actors, which we can see in this really fancy diagram that I made. The airport, the passengers, and the residents of local communities who live near the airport. Between these three actors, we also have three sets of relationships, and now obviously a really basic one is between passengers and the airport. Passengers depend on the airport for their transport needs, and the airport relies on passengers as a crucial source of revenue. Another basic relationship is between the airport and the residents. So let's think of the example of someone who lives in a town near the airport and works at the airport as a baggage handler. So again, that's an example of a mutually beneficial relationship where the airport is creating employment opportunities for local communities, and those towns provide a reliable source of labor. Until now, most airport development has focused on those two sets of relationships between the airport and the passengers and between the airport and local residents. But what we haven't considered is the productive potential embedded in the third set of relationships between the passengers and local residents. Identifying ways to strengthen the relationship between all three actors, airports, passengers, and residents, is a powerful tool for developing design guidelines that facilitate airport operations, improve the passenger experience, and benefit local communities. Because strengthening these links addresses two fundamental challenges that airports face today. One is inside the terminal, and one is on the airport's edge. And let me just break those down for you really quickly. So first, the demographics of air travel are changing fast. Not only, as we heard this morning, are there many more passengers than ever before, but they've become much more diverse in terms of age, income level, and cultural background. And just to give you guys three examples of this: middle-class passengers from China, medical tourists, and business travelers who fly on budget airlines. Each of these passenger segments has highly specialized transport needs, taste preferences, and spending habits. With more travelers than ever passing through the terminal, it's crucial to offer a targeted experience to different passenger types. But airport operations aren't keeping pace with these demographic changes, and we as design professionals need to identify opportunities for making formal and programmatic changes in order to better cater to these growing passenger types. That's the first challenge. The second challenge is the widening gap between airports and local communities in the airport area. So in many cities, we find an airport that's growing super quickly, but is surrounded by a hinterland where the population is sinking economically. The benefits that the airport provides to its catchment area as a whole are missing in the communities just beyond the fence, and efforts to encourage growth by building office parks and conferencing facilities often don't work. And that's because this kind of strategy isn't thinking about urban design in terms of the users involved. It isn't matching passengers' needs with residents' skills. So take a proposal for a new international trade center next to the airport. Here you have to ask yourself, is there really enough demand from arriving business travelers, or is that demand already being satisfied by existing facilities that are like half an hour from the airport? And do local residents really have the social and also the technical skills needed to work in a formal office environment? Often the answer to both of these questions is no. Thinking about the relationship between passengers and residents empowers us to see more clearly what passengers want, what residents can offer, and how airports can grow their non-aviation revenue. So, working together with airports, with design firms, and local planning agencies, I organize workshops where we strategize about how to strengthen these three sets of relations in order to come up with innovative urban design strategies that are both economically viable and socially sustainable. And it's also something I'm working on with my students at Hong Kong U, where we're modeling land use patterns around airport hubs in China in order to deliver insights about airport development and passenger trends in Asia. Unfortunately, I don't have the time to go into this methodology with you today, but I'd like to just kind of throw out a few ideas to give you a flavor of the direction that these strategy sessions can take. So a big trend in Asian and Middle Eastern airports is layover tourism, and as some of you may know, these kind of strategies allow passengers who are in transit to kind of exit the terminal for a few hours, even sometimes 1 or 2 hours, and go experience local culture at and around the airport. And this has been super successful in places like Narita and also Incheon, which you see here in Korea. And while they do this, they eat at restaurants and they buy local delicacies. And basically what you're doing is matching demand among passengers for interesting activities during long layovers with existing skills and interesting features in the airport area. Those of you who work in Asia, or maybe who read my blog, will also know that this is really popular among Asian passengers, because when you take a trip, it's kind of expected that you bring back unique local presents for family members and work colleagues. And this often takes the form of food. So working together with a couple local planning agencies in Paris, I actually analyzed thousands of photos that were recently uploaded to social media from people who were living in 3 towns near Charles de Gaulle. And doing that, we uncovered not just an extensive knowledge base about culinary traditions from around the world, but actually also a network of small-scale entrepreneurs who are trying to monetize that knowledge via social media. And maybe most interesting, there seems to already be a small group of tourists, mainly from Asia, who have taken note of these food offerings. So using these insights, basically what I'm trying to do is use these insights to formulate alternative urban development strategies around Charles de Gaulle. And food is actually an interesting design strategy because culinary talent transcends class lines and levels of education. And also everyone, no matter where they're from, really appreciates good food. Food brings people together. So basically this is an example of a strategy where you start with what's already there in the airport area and you try to strengthen it. How could airport design facilitate interaction between the passengers and the residents in order to increase job opportunities for local inhabitants while also raising the customer experience of passengers? Another example I like to give where airport design can facilitate this interaction is festival tourism. So here you see Asia World Expo at Hong Kong International Airport. Asia World Expo was actually originally built as a convention center, which failed because there's a much better one downtown. So instead they turned it into the city's largest concert venue, which was kind of taking advantage of the fact that you can make a lot of noise at the airport. This has turned out to be a really productive strategy because of the growth in festival tourism, where people will fly somewhere for the weekend to watch their favorite bands perform. So again, Asia World Expo is matching passenger demand for entertainment-driven tourism with existing skills at the airport in kind of security and crowd management control. A lot of this time, this festival tourism is branded, and travelers really want to experience the music in the place where it was created. So where I live, Korean music, or K-pop, is really popular, which explains why there are plans now on the table to develop a similar arena at Incheon. I was thinking about this during a recent trip to Atlanta, where I was invited to speak on airport area development around Hartsfield. As some of you know, right now Atlanta is kind of like the epicenter of hip-hop royalty, and it's also kind of become the place to showcase in the entertainment industry. And in preparing for my trip, I was really impressed to find out that College Park, the town located right next to the airport, is home to some of the most famous musicians alive today. Their music isn't just what people are listening to all over America, but actually all over the world. So essentially what you have is cultural capital right on the doorstep of the airport that most cities can only dream of. Working together now with the Atlanta Regional Council, we're trying to think about how we could draw on some of these artists and producers, and in collaboration with global media outlets, think about coming up with an entertainment-driven urban design concept at and around the airport. It's something I'm really excited about. We're going to be starting on this next spring, so stay tuned for more. So basically, to come to my conclusion, these are just two examples of how a user-driven approach to airport design, where you focus on the needs of passengers and on the actual existing strengths of local communities, can produce both creative economic development strategies and also site-specific urban design guidelines. I'm not saying that they should totally replace the older Aerotropolis concept, but at the same time, the Airport Urbanism, or AU model, opens up a whole range of alternative development strategies that are really excluded by the Aerotropolis's narrow focus on office space and logistics parks. I'm looking forward to discussing this with you during the Q&A. Thank you.